I have stood the night watch at the nursery door for 11 years. I have seen things that would hollow a lesser soldier, the Empress Vareth's long illness, the 3 days her ladies wept without stopping, the morning they carried her out and the emperor walked behind her with his hands at his sides and said nothing to anyone for 2 weeks. I have kept my post through all of it. That is my function. I am a door guard. I stand and I watch, and I do not speak unless spoken to. I tell you this so you understand that I am not a man given to exaggeration. What I saw on the 43rd morning of Prince Sale's life, I have told only once before to my commanding officer, who wrote it down in the palace record and then looked at me for a long time without speaking. I will tell it again now, plainly, the way it happened. The young prince had not slept more than 2 consecutive hours since the empress died. The palace healers said there was nothing physically wrong with him. His lungs were strong, his color was right, his temperature held. But he screamed. He screamed with the particular pitch of an infant who has lost something he does not have words for yet, because he has no words yet for anything, and so he screams instead, and the sound fills a palace corridor, the way water fills a low place completely, with nowhere left to go. 3 head nannies had been assigned to the nursery in as many weeks. All 3 had been experienced, credentialed women, carrying the quiet authority of palace service. None had managed more than 4 hours of consecutive quiet from the boy. The third, a Lady Merit of the court's inner household, had sat with me in the corridor on the 39th day and pressed both hands over her face and said she did not know what else to try. She had sung every lullaby in the Vorathi canon. She had rocked him in every tempo. She had consulted the palace's foremost infant physicians and even allowed the senior court musicians to play softly outside the nursery door, which had produced 30 minutes of tentative quiet, and then an eruption of screaming that lasted until dawn. The emperor came each evening and stood over the cradle. He is not a demonstrative man. He expresses love through staying, remaining in the room, present and still, while everyone around him moves and tries. He stayed. It was not enough. The boy did not know him yet, not really, and whatever the boy had known and lost was not something the emperor's stillness could replace. On the morning of the 43rd day, I was posted outside the nursery door as always, and the hall was quiet in the particular exhausted way it gets between 4 and 6 in the morning, when the boy has finally worn himself out and dropped into sleep. Lady Merit was inside. The fire lamp above the door was turned low. I heard footsteps from the kitchen corridor, not the soft slippered steps of a courtier, hard-soled work boots on stone, unhurried, the gait of someone who has walked this floor 1,000 times and has no particular thought about it. I looked down the passage. It was the human kitchen worker, Dara Ven. I knew her by sight. She had worked the palace kitchen for 6 years, brought over on a contract from the Human Labor Exchange because the emperor had developed a fondness for a grain porridge the Vorathi cooks could not replicate. She was a broad-shouldered woman in her middle years, her hair pulled back under a kitchen cloth, her apron carrying the stain of the morning's work. She was carrying a covered tray warm broth for Lady Merit, I assumed, who had taken to drinking it through the long nights. She saw me. She nodded the brisk, matter-of-fact nod of a working person acknowledging another working person at an ungodly hour. I nodded back and opened the door. What happened next took perhaps 30 seconds. Dara Ven stepped into the nursery, set the tray on the side table, and turned to offer Lady Merit the cup. And at that moment, the particular moment, for no reason either of them could have anticipated, Prince Sale woke up. He did not build to the screaming. He simply opened his eyes, opened his mouth, and the sound began, the full-throated, inconsolable sound, and Lady Merit was already moving toward the cradle. But she had been moving toward the cradle for 3 weeks, and her body carried the particular tightness of someone who is trying very hard and knows they are about to fail again. I do not know why Dara Ven moved first. She told me afterward she did not think about it. She said she heard the sound and her hands were already reaching. She said it was not different in the moment from picking up a mixing bowl that was sliding off a shelf, just a thing that needed catching before it fell. She lifted the boy. She pulled him against her chest, against the apron, against the warmth and the particular smell of a working kitchen, grain and steam and something faintly sweet, and she began to sway. Not a deliberate, practiced rocking, but the absent-minded sway of a woman who has stood in one place for hours, and her body has simply learned to move while her mind is elsewhere. And she began to hum. Not a lullaby I recognized. Not anything from the Vorathi canon or the human formal tradition. Just a low, wandering, tuneless kind of humming, the sort of sound a person makes when they are alone in a kitchen at 5 in the morning, and not thinking about anything in particular. The screaming stopped. Not gradually, not with a winding down. It stopped the way a candle stops when you cup your hand over it all at once, and then only the warmth remaining. Lady Marrett stood perfectly still. I stood perfectly still in the doorway, which I had not closed behind me, because I had heard the screaming begin and had turned back to look and then could not look away. Dara Ven did not notice any of us. She was swaying and humming and looking at the boy with the mild, untroubled attention of someone watching a pot that is almost ready, and the boy was looking back at her with his enormous pale eyes, and his hands had found the edge of her apron and were gripping it. He made a sound, not crying, a different sound, small, effortful, the sound an infant makes when he is attempting something his mouth has not yet learned to do reliably. He said, "Mama." I know the debate. The court physician said afterward it was not a word precisely, a vocalization, a phoneme without semantic content, sounds an infant produces before he has meaning to attach to them. I know all of this. I was there. I know what I heard. And I know what I saw on Lady Marrett's face, which was not the face of a woman hearing a meaningless phoneme. The Emperor came for his morning visit 2 hours later. By then the boy was asleep, still in Dara Ven's arms. She had sat down in the nursing chair because her back was beginning to ache, she told me, and she had not wanted to risk waking him by moving him. She was still there when His Majesty came through the door, her head tipped back against the chair, half dozing herself, the boy a small bundle of silence against her chest. The Emperor stood in the doorway for a long time, long enough that I began to be concerned about protocol, about whether I should say something, about whether Dara Ven should be awoken, and the situation explained before he misunderstood it. But his face was not the face of a man who needed anything explained. He watched his son sleep, watched him sleep without the rigid, straining stillness of the past 6 weeks, watched him sleep the loose, heavy sleep of an infant who is simply and completely safe. And something in the Emperor's face shifted in a way I had not seen in a very long time. He did not make a ceremony of it. He is not that kind of man. He waited until Dara Ven stirred and opened her eyes and found him watching her, and I expected her to scramble up, to apologize, to try to explain herself. Instead, she looked at him the way she had looked at me in the corridor, direct, calm, one working person to another, and said, "He's been down about an hour. I can try to put him in the cradle if you want, but I don't know if it'll hold." The Emperor was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Would you come back tomorrow?" "I've got a kitchen shift at 4, she said. "The kitchen shift can be adjusted." She considered this the way she seemed to consider everything, without drama, without performance, the way a practical person considers a practical question. Then she nodded. "All right," she said. "I'll come back tomorrow." She handed the boy to his father with the careful competence of someone who has done this before, who knows how to support the head, who does not rush. The Emperor took his son. The boy stirred but did not wake. Dara Ven picked up her tray, the broth had long gone cold, and walked back out to the kitchen. I watched her go. I heard her footsteps in the corridor, the same unhurried work boot rhythm, receding toward the kitchen stairs. I do not think she knew what she had done. I do not think if you had asked her she would have been able to give you a name for it. She had heard a child crying. Her hands had reached. That was all. That was everything.